Have you ever wondered why certain valleys in Appalachia remain unmapped, their coordinates mysteriously absent from government surveys? The answer lies buried in classified files that document encounters with something that shouldn't exist, yet continues to claim victims with systematic precision. In 1994, three separate incident reports filed with the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources described encounters with what witnesses called the Hollow Watcher, a creature that has haunted the region's deepest valleys for over 2 centuries. What makes these reports particularly disturbing isn't their fantastical nature, but rather their clinical consistency across generations of terrified survivors. The first documented encounter occurred in February 1823, when trapper Moses Whitman emerged from Sorrow's End Valley after a 3-week expedition. His journal, discovered in 1978 during a historical survey, provides the earliest detailed account of what locals had whispered about for decades. Whitman described discovering tracks in the snow that measured nearly 2 feet in length, with claw marks that scored the frozen earth like knife wounds. But it wasn't the tracks that drove him from the valley, it was what made them. "The thing stands tall as 2 men," Whitman wrote in his cramped, urgent handwriting, "but moves wrong, like joints bend where they shouldn't. Watched me for 3 days from the ridgeline, never coming closer, never moving when I looked direct, but always there when I turned back. Eyes like winter stars, cold and far away, but seeing everything." What distinguishes Whitman's account from typical frontier folklore is his obsessive documentation of behavioral patterns. The creature, he noted, appeared only during overcast days, positioning itself at specific elevations that provided optimal sight lines across the valley floor. It demonstrated what Whitman termed hunting intelligence, tracking his movements, anticipating his routes, and maintaining surveillance distances that suggested strategic thinking rather than animal instinct. Modern behavioral analysis of Whitman's descriptions reveals something even more unsettling. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a wildlife behavioral specialist who studied the accounts in 2003, noted that the creature's stalking patterns matched those of persistence predators, animals that exhaust their prey through prolonged pursuit rather than direct confrontation. However, the timescales involved far exceeded anything observed in natural predators. The Hollow Watcher wasn't hunting for a meal, it was conducting psychological warfare. The pattern established in Whitman's time continues today with remarkable consistency. Victims report the same initial awareness of being watched, the same strategic positioning by the creature, and the same gradual escalation of psychological pressure. Park Ranger Jennifer Hayes documented this progression in her 2019 incident report following a week-long encounter that left her requesting permanent transfer from the region. Day 1, you notice the birds stop singing in a specific area, Hayes wrote. Day 2, you start seeing movement in your peripheral vision that vanishes when you look. Day 3, you find evidence, broken branches at impossible heights, scratches in tree bark that go up 20 feet or more. By day 4, you know you're being evaluated. By day 5, you realize the evaluation is over and something has made a decision about you. Hayes survived her encounter by violating standard wilderness protocol and abandoning her assigned patrol route. She joined a group of hikers, reasoning that the creature seemed to target isolated individuals. Her strategy proved correct, though the psychological toll remained severe. 6 months after her report, Hayes continued experiencing what she described as phantom surveillance, the persistent sensation of being watched even in urban environments. The creature's physical description has remained remarkably consistent across nearly 2 centuries of encounters. Witnesses describe a bipedal entity standing between 12 and 14 feet in height, with proportions that suggest human ancestry stretched to impossible dimensions. The limbs are described as grotesquely elongated, with joints that bend in multiple directions, allowing for movement patterns that defy normal anatomical constraints. The head, proportionally small for the body, features pronounced brow ridges and eye sockets that house luminescent organs rather than conventional eyes. Most disturbing are the accounts of the creature's facial expressions. Unlike animal predators, which typically display aggressive or predatory behaviors, the Hollow Watcher reportedly exhibits what witnesses describe as clinical interest, the detached observation of a researcher studying specimens. Multiple survivors have used the same phrase. It looks at you like you're a puzzle it's trying to solve. Dr. Marcus Thornfield, a cryptozoologist who studied Appalachian folklore for 40 years, theorized that the Hollow Watcher represents an evolutionary divergence that occurred in the region's isolated valleys. His research, published posthumously in 2001, suggested that geographic isolation combined with unique mineral compositions in certain areas might have created evolutionary pressure for extreme adaptations. Thornfield's hypothesis gains credibility when considering the creature's apparent intelligence and its systematic approach to human contact. The valleys where encounters occur share specific geological characteristics that support Thornfield's theory. All feature unusual magnetic properties that interfere with compass readings and electronic devices. The soil contains elevated levels of rare earth minerals, particularly europium and terbium, which are known to affect electromagnetic fields. These conditions create natural isolation barriers that could have supported divergent evolution over extended periods. Local Cherokee oral traditions provide additional context that predates European settlement by centuries. Elder Joseph Crow Feather, interviewed in 1987, described stories passed down through his family about the tall ones who watch from the high places. According to Cherokee tradition, these entities were neither spirits nor animals, but something in between, beings that had chosen to become more than human but less than divine. The Cherokee avoided certain valleys not from fear, but from respect for boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. My grandfather's grandfather told him never to hunt alone in the places where the earth hums, Crowfeather explained. He said the tall ones had been there since the mountains were young, watching over something that sleeps below. They don't hunt for food or territory. They hunt to keep the balance. This reference to something sleeping below correlates with geological surveys that have identified extensive cave systems beneath the affected valleys. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed chambers of unprecedented size, some extending more than a mile into the earth. These caverns contain acoustic properties that amplify and distort sound in ways that could explain the psychological effects reported by witnesses. The constant, low-frequency vibrations might also account for the humming earth described in Cherokee traditions. The psychological impact on survivors follows a predictable pattern that suggests systematic conditioning rather than random trauma. Initial encounters typically last 3 to 5 days, during which the creature maintains visual contact while gradually decreasing its distance from the target. Survivors report mounting anxiety that peaks on the fourth day, followed by either escape or a final, close range encounter that invariably results in the victim fleeing the area permanently. Dr. Sarah Chen, a trauma specialist who studied 10 documented survivors between 2010 and 2015, identified common elements that suggest the encounters serve a specific purpose. The progression follows too rigid a pattern to be coincidental, Chen noted in her unpublished research. The creature seems to be conducting a form of psychological evaluation, determining something about each individual before either allowing them to leave or escalating the encounter. Chen's research was terminated after she attempted to locate survivors who hadn't reported their encounters to authorities. Of the 12 individuals she contacted through social media and local records, only 3 responded to her inquiries. The others had either moved away from the region entirely, or, in 2 cases, simply vanished from their communities without explanation. The most recent documented encounter occurred in October 2023, when wildlife photographer David Kumar ventured into Sorrow's End Valley to document seasonal changes in the region's ecosystem. Kumar's experience followed the established pattern with one crucial difference. He maintained detailed photographic documentation throughout his encounter. Kumar's images, analyzed by digital forensics experts, show progressive evidence of surveillance that escalates from subtle environmental disturbances to clear photographic evidence of the creature itself. The final photographs, taken on the 4th day of his expedition, show the entity positioned less than 50 yards from Kumar's campsite. The creature's pose suggests careful observation rather than aggressive intent, supporting theories about its evaluative behavior. What makes Kumar's encounter unique is his decision to document rather than flee. His photographs provide the first clear visual evidence of the creature's physical characteristics, confirming witness descriptions while revealing additional details that explain its effectiveness as a persistence predator. The entity's coloration provides near-perfect camouflage against the valley's limestone formations, while its elongated limbs allow for movement across terrain that would challenge conventional bipedal locomotion. Kumar survived his encounter by adopting what he described as reciprocal observation. Rather than fleeing when he spotted the creature, he continued his photographic work while maintaining eye contact. This approach seemed to satisfy whatever criteria the entity was applying, and it withdrew to the ridgeline before disappearing entirely. Government response to Hollow Watcher encounters has evolved from dismissal to quiet acknowledgement. The Department of Natural Resources now maintains informal protocols for handling reports, including immediate relocation of witnesses and restriction of access to affected areas. These measures are justified through environmental protection clauses, but internal documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests reveal a different motivation. A 1998 memo from the DNR's Special Incidents Division states, ongoing encounters in designated zones require continued monitoring and containment. Public safety protocols should prioritize witness relocation and information suppression. Direct engagement is not authorized under any circumstances. The phrase, continued monitoring and containment, suggests that authorities are aware of the creature's presence and have developed strategies for managing human contact. This interpretation gains support from the discovery of remote monitoring equipment in several valleys, ostensibly placed for wildlife research, but configured to detect large-scale movement patterns consistent with the entity's described behavior. Recent developments have added new urgency to the situation. Climate change has begun altering the region's ecosystem, potentially disrupting the environmental conditions that have maintained the creature's isolation for centuries. Unusual weather patterns have driven the entity into previously avoided areas, resulting in a 300% increase in reported encounters over the past 5 years. Environmental scientists studying the region have noted significant changes in local wildlife behavior that correlate with expanded creature activity. Animals that typically inhabit the affected valleys have begun migrating to higher elevations, while apex predators have abandoned territories they've occupied for generations. These behavioral changes suggest that the Hollow Watcher's influence extends far beyond direct human contact. The implications of this expanded activity extend beyond individual encounters to encompass broader questions about coexistence with entities that challenge our understanding of natural law. The creature's systematic behavior, its apparent intelligence, and its consistent interaction patterns suggest not a mindless monster, but a form of consciousness that operates according to rules we don't yet comprehend. For those who venture into Appalachia's remote valleys, the Hollow Watcher represents more than a supernatural threat. It embodies the reality that some boundaries exist, not to keep us out, but to keep something else contained. In these ancient mountains, where Cherokee wisdom speaks of sleeping giants and government files document impossible encounters, the question isn't whether such creatures exist. The question is what happens when climate change and human expansion finally force them from their hidden valleys into our world. The survivors know the answer. They've seen what watches from the ridgelines, evaluating and calculating with intelligence, both alien and terrifyingly familiar. They've felt the weight of that cold assessment and understood, in moments of perfect clarity, that humanity has never been alone in these mountains. We've simply been tolerated, and that tolerance may be ending. Have you ever wondered why certain census records from the 1890s show populated communities that simply vanished from subsequent documentation, leaving behind only cryptic notes in surveyor margins about atmospheric disturbances and territorial disputes of an unusual nature? The answer lies buried in the classified archives of the Tennessee Valley Authority, where a single folder marked Ember Ridge Investigation, sealed by federal order, contains evidence of encounters that challenge our understanding of what dwells in America's oldest mountains. The documented case of Ember Ridge represents one of the most thoroughly investigated yet systematically suppressed incidents in Appalachian history. Unlike folklore or second-hand accounts, this story emerges from official government correspondence, medical examiner reports, and the personal journals of federal investigators who witnessed phenomena that defied rational explanation. What makes Ember Ridge particularly compelling isn't the fantastical nature of the claims, but rather the clinical precision with which they were documented by men trained to skepticism. The settlement of Ember Ridge established itself in the Cumberland Mountains of eastern Tennessee in 1847, founded by three extended families seeking isolation from the social upheavals following the Mexican-American War. Located in a narrow valley accessible only through a single mountain pass, the community remained largely self-sufficient for nearly 4 decades. Census records indicate a stable population of approximately 180 residents engaged in subsistence farming, small-scale logging, and the production of medicinal herbs that commanded premium prices in regional markets. The first documented anomaly occurred in 1886 when a United States Geological Survey team conducting a mineral assessment of the region reported unusual magnetic readings throughout the valley. Lead surveyor Marcus Whitman noted in his official report that compass readings varied wildly within a specific geographic zone, creating what he termed a magnetic shadow that rendered traditional navigation methods unreliable. More disturbing was his observation that this zone appeared to expand incrementally over the course of their 6-week survey. Local residents, when questioned about the magnetic anomalies, displayed what Whitman described as peculiar reluctance to discuss certain geographic features. His private journal, discovered in 1978 during renovation of a federal building in Knoxville, provides additional context that was omitted from official reports. Whitman wrote of residents who spoke in whispers about the old boundaries and warned against venturing into specific areas after sunset. Most unsettling was their consistent reference to the Watchers, entities they claimed had inhabited the mountains since before Cherokee settlement. The Geological Survey team's final report, classified for 60 years before partial declassification in 1946, documented the discovery of extensive cave systems beneath Ember Ridge that exhibited structural impossibilities. Caverns mapped by the team showed chambers of unprecedented size, connected by passages that seemed to defy the surrounding topography. Most puzzling was the team's inability to determine the depth of the deepest chambers, as their plumb lines and acoustic measurements yielded inconsistent results that suggested the caves extended far deeper than the mountain's elevation would allow. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the team's geologist, noted in her private correspondence that the cave systems exhibited acoustic properties unlike anything in scientific literature. Sounds introduced at the entrance points would echo for periods extending well beyond what the chamber dimensions should permit, creating what she described as temporal displacement of auditory phenomena. Perhaps more unsettling was her observation that these echoes sometimes returned with subtle alterations, as if the sound had been processed or modified during its underground journey. The residents of Ember Ridge had developed specific protocols for interacting with these cave systems, treating them not as natural formations, but as living entities requiring careful negotiation. Community elder Sarah Blackthorne, interviewed by Morrison in 1886, described elaborate rituals performed at cave entrances during lunar cycles. These ceremonies, according to Blackthorne, maintained what she called the ancient agreements, compacts established by the valley's first settlers to ensure peaceful coexistence with whatever dwelled in the mountain's depths. The nature of these agreements became clearer through Morrison's careful documentation of community behavior patterns. Ember Ridge operated according to rules that seemed arbitrary to outside observers, but followed strict internal logic. Children were never allowed outdoors alone after sunset. Livestock were brought into specially constructed shelters each evening, not for protection from natural predators, but to prevent what residents termed the calling. Most significantly, the community maintained a rotation system where designated families would spend nights at specific cave entrances, performing what they described as guard duty. Morrison's attempts to understand these practices led to her most disturbing discoveries. Residents who served guard duty returned with accounts of voices emanating from the cave depths, not human voices, but sounds that approximated human speech with enough accuracy to create profound psychological discomfort. These voices, they claimed, would call residents by name, using intonations that perfectly mimicked deceased family members or absent community members. The Watchers, according to these accounts, demonstrated intimate knowledge of community dynamics and personal histories that should have been impossible for any external entity to possess. The federal investigation that followed Morrison's preliminary report brought a team of specialists to Ember Ridge in early 1887. Led by Captain James Hartford of the Army Corps of Engineers, the investigation team included physicians, anthropologists, and what military records euphemistically described as specialists in psychological warfare. Their mission, according to declassified documents, was to determine whether the reported phenomena represented genuine anomalies or elaborate deception that might pose national security risks. Hartford's team established a research station at the valley's entrance and began systematic documentation of daily life in Ember Ridge. Their findings, compiled over 6 months of observation, revealed community adaptations that challenged conventional understanding of human behavior. Residents had developed what anthropologist Dr. Margaret Chen termed anticipatory survival strategies, behavioral modifications that seemed designed to avoid triggering responses from the entities they coexisted with. The most significant of these adaptations was the community's relationship with sound. Ember Ridge residents had over generations modified their speech patterns, vocal volumes, and even their methods of food preparation to minimize acoustic disturbance. They spoke in carefully modulated tones, avoided sudden loud noises, and had developed an elaborate system of hand signals for communication during what they called listening hours, periods when the Watchers were believed to be most active. Dr. Chen's interviews with long-term residents revealed the gradual evolution of these practices over the settlement's 40-year history. Early residents had attempted to ignore or dismiss the phenomena, but a series of disappearances in the 1850s had forced the community to acknowledge that they shared their valley with something that demanded accommodation. The missing residents, according to community records, had all violated what became established protocols, venturing too close to cave entrances during forbidden hours, making excessive noise during evening activities, or failing to participate in the guard duty rotation. Captain Hartford's team initially approached these accounts with appropriate skepticism, viewing them as manifestations of collective hysteria or elaborate folklore. This skepticism ended abruptly during their third month of observation when team member Dr. Robert Ashford disappeared during a solo survey of the cave systems. Ashford, a qualified speleologist with extensive underground exploration experience, had dismissed community warnings about cave entry protocols as superstition. His disappearance occurred despite his use of modern safety equipment and communication devices that should have ensured constant contact with the surface team. The search for Ashford revealed the first direct evidence of the entities described by Ember Ridge residents. Search teams, following established protocols, found Ashford's equipment arranged in precise geometric patterns at multiple cave entrances, with his notebooks filled with handwriting that analysis confirmed as his own, despite the impossibility of his presence at multiple locations simultaneously. Most disturbing was the content of these notebooks, which contained detailed observations of underground spaces that Ashford could not have accessed given the timeline of his disappearance. Ashford's notes described vast subterranean chambers populated by entities he could only partially perceive, forms that seemed to exist at the edge of human sensory capability. His descriptions, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, spoke of watchers that observed human activity with scientific detachment, studying community behavior patterns with the methodology of researchers examining laboratory specimens. Most unsettling was his growing realization, documented in his final entries, that the residents of Ember Ridge were not coexisting with these entities, but serving as subjects in an ongoing experiment of unprecedented duration and sophistication. The federal team's investigation took on new urgency following Ashford's disappearance. Hartford implemented enhanced security protocols and began systematic documentation of the phenomena reported by residents. Using newly developed acoustic monitoring equipment, the team recorded hours of sounds emanating from the cave systems, vocalizations that demonstrated clear intelligence and purpose despite their non-human origin. Linguistic analysis revealed these sounds contained structural elements consistent with language, but following grammatical rules that no human language had ever exhibited. More disturbing was the team's discovery that these vocalizations showed adaptive responses to human presence. The entities appeared capable of learning and mimicking human speech patterns with increasing accuracy over time. Recordings from the investigation's final weeks captured sounds that perfectly replicated the voices of team members, community residents, and even individuals who had never visited Ember Ridge, but whose voices the entities had somehow acquired knowledge of. Dr. Chen's psychological evaluation of long-term residents revealed the profound impact of decades-long exposure to these phenomena. Community members displayed what she termed adaptive dissociation, the ability to function normally while maintaining awareness of constant observation by non-human intelligence. Children born in Ember Ridge demonstrated enhanced auditory sensitivity and spatial awareness that Chen attributed to generational adaptation to their unique environment. Perhaps most significantly, Chen discovered that community members had developed rudimentary communication protocols with the Watchers. Through careful observation of cause and effect relationships, residents had learned to interpret the entity's responses to human activity. Certain actions would result in increased vocal activity from the caves, while others would produce periods of ominous silence that residents had learned to fear more than the voices themselves. The investigation's climax occurred during Hartford's final month in Ember Ridge, when the team attempted direct communication with the entities using equipment designed for long-range acoustic transmission. The response exceeded all expectations and fundamentally altered the team's understanding of what they were dealing with. The entities demonstrated not only awareness of the investigation team's presence, but detailed knowledge of their backgrounds, mission objectives, and even classified information that should have been impossible for them to obtain. Captain Hartford's final report, classified at the highest levels and remaining partially redacted even today, concluded that the entities beneath Ember Ridge represented either an unknown form of indigenous intelligence or evidence of technological capabilities far exceeding current human understanding. His recommendation for immediate evacuation of the valley and establishment of permanent federal oversight was implemented within days of the report's submission. The evacuation of Ember Ridge in November 1887 was conducted under the pretense of protecting residents from geological instability. Community members offered financial compensation and resettlement assistance, displayed remarkable compliance with federal directives. Dr. Chen noted in her final observations that residents seemed almost relieved to finally abandon their valley, as if their 4-decade accommodation with the Watchers had reached a natural conclusion. The federal monitoring station, established at Ember Ridge, operated continuously from 1888 to 1962, when budget constraints forced its closure. Monitoring reports from this period document ongoing activity in the cave systems, with acoustic anomalies persisting for decades after human departure. The station's final report noted a gradual diminishment of recorded phenomena, as if the entities were entering a period of dormancy following the end of their long observation of human subjects. Today, Ember Ridge remains under federal protection as part of a geological research preserve. Official justification cites unstable cave systems and ongoing geological monitoring, but former Park Service employees report continuing restrictions on access that extend far beyond normal safety protocols. Hikers attempting to reach the valley describe experiencing severe disorientation, equipment malfunctions, and the persistent sensation of being observed by unseen watchers. Recent geological surveys using ground-penetrating radar have revealed that the cave systems beneath Ember Ridge continue to expand, following patterns that suggest deliberate excavation rather than natural formation. These findings have prompted renewed federal interest in the site, though current research remains classified under national security provisions. The legacy of Ember Ridge challenges our understanding of human adaptation and the possibility of intelligence existing in forms we are only beginning to comprehend. The residents who spent 40 years learning to coexist with entities beyond human understanding developed survival strategies that may prove increasingly relevant as our expanding presence in remote areas brings us into contact with phenomena that conventional science struggles to explain. The Watchers beneath Ember Ridge may represent our first documented encounter with intelligence that predates human civilization in North America, entities that view our species not as invaders or threats, but as subjects worthy of careful, patient study. Their methods suggest an understanding of human psychology and social dynamics that surpasses our own, raising uncomfortable questions about who, in these remote mountain valleys, is truly the observer and who is being observed. In the deepest caves of the Cumberland Mountains, something continues to wait and watch, patient as the stone itself, accumulating knowledge about a species that believes itself the dominant intelligence on a planet that may harbor forms of consciousness we have yet to recognize or understand. Have you ever wondered why certain geological surveys from the early 1900s contain deliberate omissions, with entire sections of topographical data systematically redacted by government officials who cited national security concerns for areas containing nothing more than rural farmland? The answer lies buried in the classified archives of the United States Geological Survey, where a single folder marked Greystone Hollow Investigation Indefinite Suspension contains evidence of encounters that fundamentally challenged our understanding of human evolution and territorial boundaries in the Appalachian region. The documented case of Greystone Hollow represents one of the most meticulously recorded, yet systematically suppressed incidents in American geographical history. Unlike typical folklore or anecdotal accounts, this investigation emerges from official government correspondence, detailed field reports, and the personal journals of respected scientists who witnessed phenomena that existing biological frameworks could not accommodate. What makes Greystone Hollow particularly compelling isn't the extraordinary nature of the claims, but rather the methodical precision with which they were documented by researchers trained in empirical observation. The Greystone Hollow region established itself as a point of scientific interest in 1903 when the newly formed United States Geological Survey began comprehensive mapping operations throughout the southern Appalachian Range. Located in an isolated valley spanning the Tennessee-North Carolina border, the area appeared unremarkable on preliminary surveys: rolling hills covered in dense deciduous forest, typical limestone cave formations, and a small creek system that fed into the broader Tennessee River watershed. Initial geological assessments suggested standard Appalachian topography with no unusual mineral deposits or geological features warranting special attention. The first documented anomaly occurred during the summer survey expedition of 1904 when team leader Dr. Marcus Whitfield noted unusual behavioral patterns among local wildlife that seemed inconsistent with established ecological principles. His field journal, discovered in 1978 during renovation of a USGS facility in Knoxville, provides the earliest scientific documentation of what would become known as the territorial displacement phenomenon. Whitfield observed that native species, deer, black bears, various bird populations, maintained strict boundaries within the hollow that corresponded to no visible environmental factors. These boundaries, which Whitfield mapped with surveyor's precision, created distinct zones where different species congregated in unusual densities. Most significantly, he noted the complete absence of any animal life within a roughly circular area measuring approximately 2 miles in diameter at the hollow's center. This zone, which Whitfield termed the exclusion circle, contained flourishing plant life and appeared environmentally suitable for wildlife, yet remained consistently uninhabited by any vertebrate species larger than insects. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, The expedition's wildlife biologist conducted detailed studies of this phenomenon over a 6-week period. Her research notes reveal growing concern about what she termed intelligent territorial organization among local fauna. Animals approaching the exclusion circle's perimeter would halt their advance at precise geographic coordinates, as if responding to an invisible barrier. Morrison documented instances where deer would graze peacefully within feet of this boundary, but would exhibit signs of extreme agitation if researchers attempted to guide them across the threshold. More disturbing was Morrison's observation that animals within the exclusion zone's vicinity demonstrated behavioral modifications that suggested adaptation to the presence of a dominant territorial competitor. Local fauna had developed enhanced vigilance behaviors, modified feeding patterns, and communication systems that Morrison described as systematically evolved responses to a persistent apex presence. These adaptations implied long-term coexistence with an entity that maintained territorial control through methods that left no physical evidence but produced consistent behavioral compliance. The federal investigation that followed Morrison's preliminary reports brought a specialized research team to Greystone Hollow in the spring of 1905. Led by Colonel James Hartford, a veteran of frontier military operations with extensive experience in territorial disputes, the team included specialists in anthropology, wildlife biology, and what military records euphemistically described as frontier psychology. Their mission, according to declassified documents, was to determine whether the reported phenomena represented unknown wildlife species, undocumented indigenous populations, or potential security threats to ongoing westward settlement operations. Hartford's team established a permanent research station at the hollow's entrance and began systematic documentation of daily activities within the exclusion zone. Their findings, compiled over 8 months of continuous observation, revealed patterns of territorial maintenance that defied conventional understanding of animal behavior. The team documented evidence of systematic landscape modification within the exclusion zone, subtle alterations to vegetation patterns, strategic placement of natural obstacles, and maintenance of sight lines that suggested deliberate environmental engineering. Most significantly, the research team discovered physical evidence of the territorial entity through carefully preserved track impressions in the hollow's softer soil areas. These tracks, measuring between 14 and 16 inches in length, displayed characteristics that challenged existing taxonomic classifications. Dr. Margaret Chen, the expedition's comparative anatomist, noted that while the impressions shared basic structural similarities with large primate footprints, they exhibited proportional relationships and gait patterns that suggested bipedal locomotion by an entity significantly larger than any known North American species. Chen's detailed analysis revealed additional anomalies that complicated simple classification. The tracks showed evidence of deliberate placement rather than natural walking patterns, suggesting that the entity possessed sophisticated understanding of tracking and counter-tracking techniques. More unsettling was Chen's discovery that the footprints demonstrated seasonal variations in depth and stride length that indicated the entity's physical characteristics changed according to environmental conditions or biological cycles. The expedition's most significant breakthrough occurred during their 7th month of observation when team member Dr. Robert Ashford successfully recorded direct acoustic evidence of the territorial entity. Using newly developed phonographic equipment, Ashford captured vocalizations emanating from the exclusion zone's interior during early morning hours. These recordings, analyzed by linguistic specialists at Johns Hopkins University, revealed sound patterns that demonstrated clear communicative intent despite following no recognizable language structure. The vocalizations exhibited characteristics that suggested both intelligence and territorial assertion. Acoustic analysis revealed modulated frequency patterns, rhythmic repetition, and responsive elements that indicated the entity was aware of human presence and was communicating information about territorial boundaries. Most unsettling was the discovery that these vocalizations contained mimetic elements, portions that appeared to replicate human speech patterns and even specific words, suggesting the entity had been observing and learning from human linguistic behavior. Dr. Ashford's recordings also captured what appeared to be multiple, distinct voices, indicating either a social group or an individual entity capable of producing varied vocal signatures. Linguistic analysis suggested a complex communication system that incorporated environmental acoustics with vocalizations designed to carry specific meanings across different distances and terrain features. The entity appeared to possess sophisticated understanding of sound propagation and acoustic positioning. The investigation's most disturbing discovery emerged during the team's final month when they documented evidence of systematic human observation by the territorial entity. Colonel Hartford's security protocols included rotating guard positions and varied patrol schedules designed to detect any surveillance activities. Despite these precautions, the team began finding evidence that their movements, schedules, and even individual behavioral patterns had been carefully studied and predicted. Personal items would be repositioned in their camp with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of individual ownership and usage patterns. Equipment would be found arranged in configurations that demonstrated understanding of its operational purpose. Most unsettling was the discovery that the entity had been creating detailed replicas of human artifacts using natural materials, crude but recognizable representations of camp tools, clothing items, and even personal effects that suggested careful observation and analysis of human material culture. Hartford's final report, classified at the highest levels and remaining partially redacted even today, concluded that the entity controlling Greystone Hollow represented either an unknown species of North American megafauna with unprecedented intelligence levels, or evidence of indigenous populations that had developed survival strategies far beyond documented tribal capabilities. His recommendation for immediate establishment of permanent federal oversight and restriction of civilian access was implemented within weeks of the report's submission. The federal monitoring protocols established for Greystone Hollow operated continuously from 1906 to 1954, when budget constraints and shifting national priorities forced suspension of active surveillance. Monitoring reports from this period document ongoing territorial maintenance activities within the exclusion zone, with acoustic anomalies and landscape modifications persisting for decades after the initial investigation. Station operators noted gradual expansion of the exclusion zone's boundaries, suggesting either population growth or increasing territorial assertiveness by the controlling entity. During the 1920s, monitoring personnel reported the first documented attempts at direct communication by the territorial entity. Audio equipment detected vocalizations that incorporated human words and phrases with increasing accuracy and contextual appropriateness. The entity appeared to be developing functional understanding of English language structure and was attempting to initiate contact with monitoring station personnel. These communication attempts were documented but never reciprocated, following strict federal protocols that prohibited direct interaction with the entity. The most significant development occurred in 1943 when monitoring equipment recorded what appeared to be structured teaching sessions within the exclusion zone. Audio surveillance captured extended periods of systematic vocalization that suggested the entity was passing information to offspring or companions. These sessions incorporated human linguistic elements, environmental sounds, and what acoustic specialists described as instructional sequences that indicated deliberate knowledge transfer about human behavior patterns and territorial maintenance techniques. World War II brought new urgency to the Greystone Hollow investigation as military planners considered potential applications for entities capable of such sophisticated territorial control and human observation. Classified documents from this period reveal proposals for contact protocols and potential recruitment operations, though no evidence suggests these plans were ever implemented. The entities demonstrated intelligence and territorial effectiveness made it a subject of interest for unconventional warfare specialists, but practical limitations and ethical concerns prevented direct engagement. The monitoring station's closure in 1954 marked the end of systematic federal observation, though the area remained under informal surveillance through periodic reconnaissance missions. Reports from these limited operations indicated continuing activity within the exclusion zone, with evidence suggesting adaptation to changing environmental conditions and persistent awareness of human presence in the broader region. Today, Greystone Hollow remains under federal protection as part of a wilderness preservation area, with public access restricted through environmental protection regulations. Official justification cites sensitive ecosystem preservation and ongoing geological monitoring, but former Park Service personnel report security protocols that extend far beyond normal conservation measures. Hikers attempting to reach the hollow's interior describe experiencing severe disorientation, equipment malfunctions, and the persistent sensation of being observed by an intelligence that understands human behavioral patterns better than humans understand themselves. Recent technological advances have enabled renewed scientific interest in the Greystone Hollow phenomena, though current research remains classified under national security provisions. Satellite imaging reveals ongoing landscape modifications within the exclusion zone that follow patterns established over a century ago, suggesting remarkable consistency in territorial maintenance across multiple generations. Thermal imaging occasionally detects heat signatures that correspond to no known species profiles, indicating the entity or its descendants continue to inhabit and control their ancestral territory. The legacy of Greystone Hollow challenges our understanding of intelligence, territoriality, and the possibility of coexistence with entities whose cognitive capabilities may exceed our own in specialized domains. The entity that has maintained control over this isolated valley for more than a century demonstrates strategic thinking, environmental manipulation, and social organization that suggests intelligence adapted specifically for territorial survival in the challenging environment of Appalachian wilderness. Perhaps most significantly, the Greystone Hollow entity appears to have developed comprehensive understanding of human behavior, technology, and social organization while maintaining successful isolation from direct human contact. This suggests intelligence capable of learning and adaptation without the technological dependencies that characterize human civilization. The entity's success in maintaining territorial control across multiple human generations indicates survival strategies that may prove increasingly relevant as human expansion continues to encroach upon the remaining wild spaces of North America. In the deepest valleys of the Appalachian Mountains, something continues to watch and learn, patient as the stone itself, maintaining boundaries established before the first European explorers entered these ancient peaks. The intelligence that controls Greystone Hollow may represent our most significant encounter with non-human cognition specifically adapted to territorial survival in environments where human advantages of technology and social organization provide no decisive benefits. The mountains keep their secrets, and in Greystone Hollow, something keeps the mountains. Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire mining community vanishes overnight, leaving behind only their bones arranged in perfect geometric patterns? In 1934, the coal mining town of Thornfield Ridge in eastern Kentucky experienced an event so disturbing that the federal government sealed all records for 90 years. What I'm about to tell you comes from recently declassified documents, survivor testimonies, and geological surveys that reveal something far more terrifying than any mining accident. The town of Thornfield Ridge was established in 1887 around a particularly rich coal seam discovered by the Consolidated Mining Company. Unlike other Appalachian mining towns, Thornfield Ridge prospered almost immediately. The coal extracted there burned with an unusual blue flame and produced twice the heat of ordinary coal, making it extraordinarily valuable for industrial purposes. By 1920, the town boasted a population of nearly 800 souls, complete with a company store, schoolhouse, and 3 churches. The first documented anomaly occurred in March 1934 when mine foreman Jacob Hensley reported strange acoustic phenomena in the deepest shafts. Workers complained of hearing what they described as singing coming from sealed sections of the mine, melodious voices harmonizing in no language they recognized. Hensley, a practical man with 30 years of mining experience, initially dismissed these reports as the typical superstitions of coal miners. However, when productivity in the affected areas began to increase dramatically, management took notice. Dr. Margaret Caldwell, a geologist from the University of Kentucky, arrived in April 1934 to investigate the unusual coal formation. Her field notes, preserved in the university archives, describe coal veins that seem to pulse with a faint luminescence, visible only in complete darkness. More disturbing was her discovery of what she termed biological inclusions within the coal itself, fossilized material that resembled neither plant nor animal matter, arranged in intricate spiral patterns that suggested intentional design rather than natural formation. The transformation of Thornfield Ridge began subtly. Miners working the deepest shafts started exhibiting behavioral changes that their families initially attributed to the stress of dangerous work. They became increasingly withdrawn during daylight hours, but displayed unusual energy and focus during their night shifts. Their wives reported that their husbands would wake before dawn and stand at their windows, staring toward the mine entrance with expressions of profound longing. By summer, these changes had spread beyond the miners to encompass nearly the entire community. The local physician, Dr. Edmund Torres, documented a peculiar medical phenomenon in his journals. Patients began visiting his office complaining of vivid dreams featuring vast underground chambers filled with crystalline formations that sang in harmonious frequencies. These dreams were so consistent among different patients that Dr. Torres began keeping detailed records, noting that each person described identical architectural features and acoustic properties. The children of Thornfield Ridge provided the most disturbing evidence of the town's transformation. Their drawings, preserved in the schoolhouse and later collected by investigators, showed remarkable consistency. Every child, regardless of age, drew pictures of underground cathedrals with towering spires of black stone, inhabited by figures that were humanoid but possessed elongated limbs and faces that seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow. Most unnervingly, the children claimed these weren't products of imagination, but memories of places they visited in their sleep. School teacher Miss Eleanor Whitman documented her growing concern in letters to her sister in Louisville. She described how her students had begun speaking in unison during lessons, their voices harmonizing in the same inexplicable language heard in the mine shafts. When she attempted to interrupt these episodes, the children would turn to stare at her with eyes that seemed far older than their years, as if something ancient was looking out through their faces. The final phase of Thornfield Ridge's transformation began on October 13th, 1934, during the new moon. Mine supervisor William Garrett's final radio transmission to the company headquarters in Lexington was recorded at 11:47 p.m. The singing has stopped. They're all going down now. The coal is calling them home. I can see the light rising from the shafts. It's beautiful. We understand now what we were always meant to do. When company investigators arrived 3 days later, they found Thornfield Ridge completely abandoned. Every building stood exactly as it had been left, with meals half finished on tables and children's toys scattered in yards. But the human inhabitants had vanished entirely. The only trace of the 800 residents was found in the mine itself, in the deepest accessible chamber. Their bones, stripped completely clean, arranged in a perfect spiral pattern that descended into a shaft so deep that dropped stones never produced an echo. The investigating team, led by Federal Inspector Thomas Crawley, spent 2 weeks documenting the scene. Their photographs, only recently declassified, show bone arrangements that defied explanation. The skeletal remains were sorted by type, all skulls in the center, surrounded by concentric rings of ribs, arm bones, and leg bones. Most disturbing was the discovery that many of the bones had been hollowed out, creating resonant chambers that produced musical tones when air passed through them. The wind moving through the mine shaft had transformed the remains of Thornfield Ridge's population into a massive, macabre organ. Geological surveys revealed that the mine shafts descended far deeper than company records indicated. The official mining depth was listed as 300 feet, but sonar equipment detected empty spaces extending more than 2 miles into the earth. These chambers appeared to be natural formations, but their walls showed tool marks suggesting they had been extensively modified by human hands, or something resembling human hands. Dr. Caldwell's final report, classified immediately upon submission, described the discovery of what she termed acoustic architecture throughout the deepest chambers. The walls had been carved with spiraling channels that amplified and directed sound waves, creating a network of natural resonance chambers that could carry whispers across vast distances underground. More troubling was her analysis of the coal itself, which she determined contained organic compounds that shouldn't exist in fossil fuel. Carbon dating of these compounds yielded impossible results, suggesting they were simultaneously ancient, beyond measure, and recently formed. The only survivor of Thornfield Ridge was discovered 6 months later, wandering the mountains of eastern Tennessee with no memory of how he had traveled nearly 200 miles from the abandoned town. Timothy Walsh, age 12 when the disappearance occurred, spent the remainder of his life in a state institution, unable to provide coherent testimony about the events of October 1934. However, nurses reported that he would often sing in his sleep, producing the same haunting melodies that had been heard in the mine shafts. Modern investigations of the site have been strictly limited by federal order, but satellite imagery reveals ongoing geological activity in the area. Seismographs detect regular acoustic vibrations emanating from deep underground, rhythmic patterns that repeat every 28 days, corresponding to the lunar cycle. Local residents in neighboring counties report occasional disturbances on new moon nights, a low humming sound that seems to rise from the earth itself, accompanied by a faint blue glow visible through the forest canopy above the abandoned town. The Consolidated Mining Company quietly dissolved following the Thornfield Ridge incident, its assets distributed among various shell corporations to obscure the connection. Company executives who possessed knowledge of the town's final days reportedly suffered a series of unfortunate accidents over the following decade, ensuring that corporate memory of the events would not survive. Perhaps most unsettling is the discovery, made during a 2019 survey using ground-penetrating radar, that the bone arrangements in the mine have continued to shift and rearrange themselves over the intervening decades. The spiral pattern has grown larger and more complex, spreading through chambers that were previously empty. Whatever force claimed the residents of Thornfield Ridge appears to be far from dormant. The files contain testimony from a forestry worker who accidentally approached the abandoned town in 2003. He reported hearing children's laughter echoing from empty houses and glimpsing figures moving behind broken windows. Most disturbing was his description of the mine entrance, which he claimed pulsed with a faint blue light that seemed to beckon him forward. He resisted the compulsion and fled, but reported recurring dreams for months afterward, dreams of walking through vast underground cathedrals while beautiful voices sang him deeper into the earth. Recent seismic activity in the region has increased significantly, with the epicenter consistently located beneath the former site of Thornfield Ridge. Geologists monitoring the area Note that these tremors follow no known pattern of tectonic movement, occurring instead in rhythmic sequences that suggest artificial rather than natural causes. The implications of this discovery remain classified, but internal memos reference the possibility that whatever transformation occurred in 1934 continues to progress in the depths below. The legacy of Thornfield Ridge serves as a reminder that in the deepest hollows of Appalachia, where ancient mountains hold secrets older than human memory, some forces are best left undisturbed. The beautiful singing that once lured an entire community into the earth may still echo through those hollow bones, waiting patiently for the next group of listeners to follow its call into the darkness below. For those who research these mountains, who venture into abandoned places seeking answers to questions that perhaps should never be asked, remember this. Sometimes the earth itself remembers what we've forgotten, and sometimes it's still hungry for more voices to join the eternal song echoing through its deepest chambers. Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire research expedition vanishes without a trace, leaving behind only cryptic field notes and photographs that shouldn't exist? In 1962, the University of Kentucky dispatched a geological survey team to investigate unusual mineral formations in the remote Sorrel Creek Valley. What they discovered there would challenge everything we thought we knew about the natural world, and more disturbingly, about the things that dwell beneath these ancient mountains. Dr. Harrison Caldwell, the expedition's lead geologist, had built his reputation on methodical scientific inquiry. His preliminary reports described Sorrel Creek Valley as containing geological formations that appear to violate established principles of sedimentary layering. The rock strata, according to his measurements, seemed to spiral downward in impossible configurations, as if the earth itself had been twisted into unnatural shapes over millennia. What initially appeared to be a fascinating geological anomaly would soon reveal itself as something far more sinister. The valley had remained largely unexplored due to its remote location in the heart of eastern Kentucky's most inaccessible wilderness. Local Cherokee legends, documented by ethnographer Dr. Margaret Whitfield in her 1958 study of regional folklore, spoke of the area as a place where the earth dreams and the dreams have teeth. These warnings had been dismissed by the academic community as primitive superstition, but Caldwell's team would soon discover that some folklore contains more truth than scholarship is prepared to acknowledge. The first indication that something was amiss came from the team's seismographic equipment. Beginning on their third day in the valley, the instruments detected rhythmic vibrations emanating from deep underground. These weren't typical geological tremors, but rather consistent patterns that suggested deliberate movement. Dr. Sarah Chen, the expedition's seismologist, noted in her field journal that the vibrations occurred precisely every 43 minutes, maintaining this schedule with mechanical precision for days on end. More disturbing was her observation that the patterns seemed to respond to human activity, intensifying whenever team members approached certain areas of the valley floor. The geological samples collected during the first week defied classification. The rock formations contained crystalline structures that exhibited properties unknown to conventional mineralogy. When exposed to direct sunlight, these crystals produced a faint luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with the underground vibrations. Laboratory analysis would later reveal that the crystals contained organic compounds that shouldn't exist in sedimentary rock, compounds that bore an unsettling resemblance to neural tissue found in complex organisms. Dr. Caldwell's personal journal, recovered months later by search teams, provides the most detailed account of the expedition's gradual descent into terror. His entries begin with standard geological observations, but progressively document phenomena that challenge rational explanation. On day 8, he wrote, "The crystals appear to be growing. Yesterday's measurements show a 3% increase in mass across all samples. Chen believes they're absorbing moisture from the air, but moisture doesn't explain the increase in structural complexity. Under magnification, they exhibit patterns remarkably similar to neural networks." The team's photographer, James Morrison, captured images that would later be classified by the university and sealed for decades. These photographs showed the crystal formations arranged in vast underground chambers, their surfaces covered with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change between exposures. Most disturbing were the images taken in the deepest accessible cave system, which revealed crystalline structures that appeared to be watching the camera, their faceted surfaces reflecting light in ways that created the illusion of eyes tracking the photographer's movement. By the second week, the psychological effects on the team became apparent. Dr. Chen reported vivid dreams of walking through vast underground cities populated by beings made of living stone. Morrison complained of feeling constantly observed, even when alone in his tent. Most troubling was the behavior of Dr. Caldwell himself, who began spending hours staring into the crystal formations, claiming he could hear them communicating in frequencies just below human perception. The expedition's final radio transmission, recorded at the university's base station, lasted exactly 7 minutes and contained information that authorities would spend decades trying to suppress. Caldwell's voice, described by the radio operator as dreamy and distant, reported that the team had made contact with what he termed the architects of the deep places. He spoke of revelations about the true nature of geological processes, claiming that mountains weren't formed by tectonic activity, but were actually the physical manifestations of vast sleeping entities that had been dreaming the world into existence for millions of years. According to the transmission, the crystals weren't minerals at all, but rather sensory organs belonging to these primordial beings. The rhythmic vibrations detected by their equipment were heartbeats, and the team had inadvertently awakened something that had been dormant for eons. Caldwell's final words before the transmission ended were, "They're showing us how the world really works. The mountains are alive, and they've been waiting so patiently for someone to listen. We understand now why the Cherokee stayed away. Some knowledge comes with a price." Search and rescue teams reached Sorrel Creek Valley 3 days later, following the expedition's missed check-in. They found the campsite intact but completely abandoned, with all equipment functioning normally and personal belongings left undisturbed. The only signs of the team's presence were their scientific instruments, still recording data, and Morrison's camera, which contained photographs of empty caverns, despite his documented images of the crystal formations. The most unsettling discovery was made in the main cave system where the team had been conducting their research. The crystal formations that Caldwell had described in such detail were gone, leaving behind smooth-walled chambers that showed no evidence of ever containing the geological anomalies that had drawn the expedition to the valley. It was as if the earth itself had consumed the evidence of its own secrets, erasing any proof of what the team had discovered. However, the search teams did find one disturbing piece of evidence: a series of perfectly spherical holes drilled into the bedrock floor of the main chamber. These holes descended vertically into the mountain with mathematical precision, their walls polished to a mirror finish that reflected light in impossible ways. Subsequent geological surveys determined that these shafts extended at least 2 miles into the earth, far beyond the reach of any known drilling equipment. More troubling was the discovery that the holes appeared to be breathing, drawing air down into the depths with a rhythm that matched the seismic patterns recorded by the missing team's equipment. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the geologist who led the follow-up investigation, submitted a report that would never be made public. Her findings, declassified only recently, described geological conditions in Sorrel Creek Valley that suggest the presence of vast hollow spaces within the mountain structure, arranged in patterns that resemble organic architecture rather than natural formation. Her team's deep penetrating radar detected chambers of enormous size connected by tunnel systems that formed what appeared to be a three-dimensional mandala extending throughout the mountain range. The official investigation concluded that the expedition team had fallen victim to a catastrophic cave-in that had obliterated all evidence of their presence. This explanation satisfied bureaucratic requirements, but failed to account for numerous inconsistencies, including the absence of debris that such an event would have produced, and the fact that the caverns showed no signs of structural collapse. More disturbing was the discovery that local seismic monitoring stations had recorded no geological activity in the region during the time frame of the expedition's disappearance. In the months following the incident, residents of communities within a 50-mile radius of Sorrel Creek Valley began reporting unusual phenomena. Farmers described livestock that would gather in perfect circles in their fields, all facing toward the distant mountains. Children drew pictures of underground cities populated by figures made of stone and light. Most unsettling were the reports from amateur geologists and hikers who claimed to hear rhythmic tapping sounds emanating from the earth itself when they ventured too close to the valley. The university quietly discontinued all geological research in the region, citing safety concerns and budget constraints. The area was eventually designated as protected wilderness, effectively limiting access to anyone without specific government authorization. Official records indicate that this protection was implemented to preserve sensitive ecological habitats, but internal documents suggest more complex motivations related to ongoing phenomena of undetermined origin. Recent satellite imagery has revealed new developments in Sorrel Creek Valley that suggest the entity or entities dwelling beneath the mountains remain active. Thermal imaging shows temperature variations in the rock formations that pulse in the same 43-minute cycles recorded by the original expedition. More disturbing are the geometric patterns visible from aerial photography, suggesting that something deep within the mountain is rearranging the landscape according to principles that exist outside human understanding. Local residents continue to report strange occurrences, particularly during the new moon when the mountains are darkest. These accounts describe a sound like massive stone grinding against stone, audible for miles but impossible to locate. Hunters speak of finding perfectly circular clearings in the forest where no vegetation grows, the earth polished smooth as glass. Most tell of an overwhelming sensation of being observed whenever they venture too close to the valley, as if vast, patient eyes are watching from deep within the mountain itself. The fate of Dr. Caldwell's expedition remains officially unexplained, but evidence suggests they discovered something that the Earth itself was determined to keep secret. Whether they fell victim to geological phenomena beyond current scientific understanding or encountered entities that exist in the spaces between what we consider reality, their disappearance serves as a reminder that these ancient mountains hold secrets that perhaps should remain undisturbed. For those who study the unexplained, Sorrel Creek Valley represents one of the most compelling cases of contact with something genuinely otherworldly. The precision of the geological anomalies, the systematic nature of the ongoing phenomena, and the complete absence of conventional explanations point to intelligence vast and alien operating according to principles that predate human civilization by millions of years. The mountains of Appalachia have always been places where the boundaries between the known and unknown grow thin. In the case of Sorrel Creek Valley, those boundaries may have been crossed entirely, revealing glimpses of realities that exist beneath our feet, patient and eternal, waiting for the right moment to reshape the world according to their ancient design. The university's expedition didn't simply vanish. They became part of something larger, something that the mountains themselves had been dreaming into existence since the world was young. Have you ever wondered why some mountains in Appalachia remain completely uninhabited, even though they offer perfect conditions for settlement? The answer lies hidden in the classified files of the Tennessee Wildlife Management Division, buried beneath decades of bureaucratic silence and deliberate misdirection. In 1953, a research team from the University of Tennessee attempted to conduct the first comprehensive biological survey of Sourwood Mountain, a 4,200-foot peak straddling the border between Sevier and Cocke counties. What they discovered there wasn't just a new species. It was something that forced the complete evacuation of 3 settlements and the permanent closure of over 40 square miles of public land. This is the documented account of the Bone Shepherd and why those who encountered it and lived to tell about it wish they hadn't. The Sourwood Mountain region had always been considered cursed by the Cherokee who originally inhabited the area. Their oral traditions spoke of a guardian spirit they called Atsila Saganage, literally translated as the fire that walks on bones. According to tribal elders interviewed in the 1930s, this entity served as a protector of the mountain's deepest secrets, ensuring that certain places remained undisturbed by human presence. European settlers largely ignored these warnings when they arrived in the early 1800s. The mountain's lower slopes proved ideal for farming, with rich soil and abundant fresh water. 3 small communities established themselves: Millerville on the eastern slope, Bone Creek Settlement to the north, and Shepherd's Hollow on the western face. For over a century, these isolated communities thrived in relative peace, developing their own distinct cultures and tight-knit family networks. The first documented unusual incident occurred in September 1952 when a hunting party from Millerville reported finding what they described as a church made of bones deep in the mountain's interior. The structure, according to their account, was constructed entirely from the skeletons of various forest animals: deer, bears, wild boar, and smaller creatures, all intricately woven together to form walls, pillars, and what appeared to be an altar. The bones were bleached white, but showed no signs of natural weathering or animal scavenging. Local authorities dismissed the report as a hoax or misidentification of natural rock formations. However, when a second hunting party attempted to relocate the structure 2 weeks later, they found something far more disturbing. The bone church had apparently been reconstructed in an entirely different location, now featuring architectural elements that seemed to incorporate human skeletal remains. Dr. Margaret Holloway, a folklore specialist from East Tennessee State University, became interested in these reports while researching Appalachian supernatural traditions. Her investigation revealed a pattern of similar encounters dating back to the 1880s, though most had been dismissed as local superstition or tall tales. Pioneer families had occasionally reported finding elaborate bone sculptures arranged in geometric patterns throughout the mountain's upper elevations, always in locations far from established trails or settlements. What distinguished these formations from typical animal behavior was their architectural complexity. Photographs taken by Dr. Holloway's research team in early 1953 showed structures that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of weight distribution, structural engineering, and artistic composition. The bone arrangements formed intricate geometric patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles beyond the capabilities of any known wildlife. The University of Tennessee Biological Survey team, led by Professor David Whitmore, arrived on Sourwood Mountain in June 1953 with the goal of cataloging the region's flora and fauna. Their preliminary investigations immediately uncovered anomalies that challenged conventional biological understanding. Animal populations in the mountain's interior showed unusual behavioral patterns. Species that should have been territorial were found living in carefully organized hierarchical structures, predators and prey coexisting in ways that defied natural selection principles. Most disturbing was the discovery of what the team termed sacrifice sites, clearings where various animal species appeared to have gathered voluntarily and died in organized arrangements. These weren't the result of disease, predation, or environmental factors. Veterinary examinations revealed that the animals had simply ceased living, their bodies showing no signs of struggle, violence, or distress. They had arranged themselves in precise circular patterns before expiring, leaving behind perfectly preserved remains that local scavenger populations refused to approach. Professor Whitmore's field notes, later classified by federal authorities, describe increasingly unsettling encounters during the team's 6-week expedition. On July 15, 1953, he wrote, "We have documented over 200 instances of what can only be described as voluntary animal sacrifice. The precision with which these creatures arrange themselves before death suggests external control or influence beyond our current scientific understanding. Even more troubling is the complete absence of decomposition. Bodies we cataloged 3 weeks ago remain in perfect condition as if time itself has stopped affecting them. The research team's first direct encounter with the entity they would later name the Bone Shepherd occurred on July 23, 1953, during a routine survey of the mountain's northwestern quadrant. Graduate student Thomas Kelly was collecting soil samples when he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. What he saw, according to his sworn testimony, was a figure approximately 8 feet tall moving through the forest with impossible silence and grace. The entity appeared to be constructed from the skeletal remains of numerous animals, but animated by some unknown force that allowed it to move with fluid, purposeful motion. Its head was formed from what appeared to be a massive elk skull, elongated and twisted into an almost human-like configuration. Its torso was a complex arrangement of rib cages from various species, woven together to create a framework that pulsed with a faint, phosphorescent light. Most unsettling were its arms, long, articulated constructions of leg bones and vertebrae that ended in hands fashioned from interlinked finger bones, some clearly human in origin. Kelly remained motionless for nearly 20 minutes as the Bone Shepherd moved through the forest around him, apparently tending to various bone structures with the careful attention of a gardener maintaining flower beds. The entity showed awareness of Kelly's presence, but seemed to regard him as a temporary intrusion rather than a threat. When it finally departed, Kelly discovered that his equipment had been carefully rearranged into a geometric pattern identical to those found at the sacrifice sites. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the research team, and Professor Whitmore made the decision to attempt systematic observation of the entity. Using motion-activated cameras positioned throughout the mountain's interior, the team documented dozens of encounters over the following weeks. The footage revealed that the Bone Shepherd was not a single creature, but rather a phenomenon. The same animating force seemed capable of inhabiting different skeletal constructions, each one adapted for specific purposes and environments. During daylight hours, the entity primarily engaged in what could only be described as architectural work, constructing and modifying bone structures throughout its territory. It showed particular interest in creating elevated observation platforms and what appeared to be communication networks, complex arrangements that seemed designed to amplify and direct sound across vast distances. The precision and complexity of these constructions suggested intelligence far beyond any known wildlife. But it was the entity's nighttime activities that truly terrified the research team. After sunset, the Bone Shepherd transformed from architect to shepherd, gathering the mountain's animal populations into organized herds that moved through the forest in carefully orchestrated patterns. Deer, bears, wild boar, and smaller creatures all followed the entity's guidance, their natural behaviors completely suppressed in favor of collective action that served some unknowable purpose. Dr. Sarah Chen, the team's animal behaviorist, observed these nocturnal processions through night vision equipment and reported phenomena that challenged everything she understood about animal psychology. The creatures showed no signs of fear or coercion, she noted in her field reports. They moved with the purposeful calm of participants in a religious ceremony, following routes and performing actions that seemed to hold deep significance for them, even though such behavior contradicts every principle of natural selection and survival instinct. The true horror of the Bone Shepherd's influence became apparent when members of the research team began experiencing changes in their own behavior. Professor Whitmore's journal entries from early August show increasing preoccupation with geometric patterns and bone arrangements. Team members reported vivid dreams of walking through vast underground chambers constructed entirely from human skeletons, guided by the phosphorescent light emanating from the Bone Shepherd's ribcage. Graduate student Lisa Morrison was the first to succumb completely to the entity's influence. On August 12th, she left the team's base camp during the night and was found the following morning sitting motionless in one of the sacrifice clearings, arranged in the characteristic circular pattern but still alive. When approached, she spoke in a monotone voice about joining the eternal construction and becoming part of the mountain's purpose. She had to be physically restrained and removed from the mountain, spending the remainder of her life in a psychiatric facility, continually drawing elaborate architectural plans for structures made entirely of bones. The final documented encounter occurred on August 18th, 1953, when the Bone Shepherd approached the research team's main camp directly. Professor Whitmore's final journal entry describes the entity standing at the edge of their campsite for over 3 hours, its phosphorescent glow pulsing in rhythmic patterns that seemed to carry meaning beyond human comprehension. Team members reported feeling an overwhelming compulsion to approach the creature to offer themselves as materials for its endless construction projects. Only the intervention of Dr. Chen, who had been monitoring the team's psychological states and recognized the signs of mental domination, prevented a complete disaster. She activated emergency flares and radio beacons that summoned a helicopter evacuation, removing the team from the mountain before any additional members could be lost to the entity's influence. The aftermath of the Sourwood Mountain expedition led to immediate and permanent changes to the region's status. Federal authorities, working with the Tennessee Wildlife Management Division, declared the mountain's upper elevations a restricted zone, officially citing concerns about unstable geological conditions and dangerous wildlife. The 3 communities that had existed on the mountain's slopes were quietly relocated through a combination of government buyouts and carefully orchestrated natural disasters that made their locations uninhabitable. Official records of the research expedition were classified under national security provisions, and all team members were required to sign comprehensive, non-disclosure agreements backed by severe legal penalties. Professor Whitmore never returned to field research, spending his remaining years in theoretical biology before taking early retirement. The other team members scattered to different institutions and research fields, none ever speaking publicly about their experiences on Sourwood Mountain. However, evidence of the Bone Shepherd's continued presence occasionally surfaces through unofficial channels. Hikers who accidentally stray into the restricted zone report finding elaborate bone sculptures that seem to grow larger and more complex with each passing year. Aerial surveys conducted by government agencies have documented structures visible from the air that dwarf anything the 1953 research team encountered, cathedral-like constructions that span entire valleys, their bone spires reaching toward the sky in patterns that suggest meaning beyond human understanding. Local residents in surrounding communities still whisper about lights seen moving through the forest on moonless nights, phosphorescent glows that dance between the trees in rhythmic patterns that seem almost musical. They speak of missing pets and livestock found arranged in perfect geometric patterns, unharmed but forever changed, their eyes holding a distant, intelligent gleam that suggests awareness of realities beyond normal animal consciousness. Most disturbing are the reports from the psychiatric facilities where the affected research team members were treated. Staff members describe patients who continually create detailed architectural drawings of impossible structures, bone cathedrals that seem to follow principles of engineering and design that human science hasn't yet discovered. These drawings show remarkable consistency across different patients, suggesting they're documenting actual locations rather than products of mental illness. The bone shepherd of Sourwood Mountain represents something beyond typical cryptozoological phenomena. This isn't a creature in any conventional sense, but rather a force of organization and purpose that operates according to principles we don't yet understand. It suggests that in the deepest parts of Appalachia, where human influence has been minimal and natural forces have operated undisturbed for millennia, consciousness and intelligence have evolved in ways that challenge our fundamental assumptions about life, death, and the boundaries between them. The restricted zone around Sourwood Mountain remains in effect today, officially monitored by the U.S. Forest Service, but actually overseen by federal agencies whose existence isn't publicly acknowledged. Satellite imagery of the area is deliberately obscured, and commercial flights are routed around the airspace above the mountain. The few government personnel authorized to enter the zone undergo extensive psychological screening and are limited to brief, heavily supervised visits that avoid the mountain's interior elevations. For those who survived their encounters with the bone shepherd, the experience left permanent marks that extended far beyond psychological trauma. They gained an understanding that the natural world contains levels of organization and purpose that human science has barely begun to recognize. They learned that consciousness isn't limited to traditional biological forms, and that intelligence can emerge from arrangements of matter that seem impossible according to our current understanding of physics and biology. The Bone Shepherd continues its work in the hidden depths of Sourwood Mountain, constructing monuments to purposes we cannot comprehend, gathering the willing participants in ceremonies that bridge the gap between life and death, organic and inorganic, individual consciousness and collective purpose. Those who have witnessed its phosphorescent glow moving through the mountain's bone cathedrals understand that some legends are not stories told to frighten children, but rather inadequate attempts to describe realities that exist just beyond the edge of human perception. In the end, the Bone Shepherd serves as a reminder that Appalachia holds secrets that predate human settlement and will continue long after our civilization has become archaeological curiosities. It stands as guardian of mysteries that perhaps we aren't meant to solve, ensuring that some boundaries remain uncrossed and some questions remain forever unanswered. Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire research facility vanishes overnight, leaving behind only classified documents that were never meant to see daylight? In 1963, the Appalachian Research Institute established a remote field station in the isolated valleys of eastern Tennessee, officially tasked with studying regional geological formations. What they discovered there would challenge everything we thought we knew about the natural world and force the government to classify their findings for over 60 years. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the project's lead researcher, had built his reputation on methodical scientific inquiry into unusual geological phenomena throughout the southeastern United States. His preliminary reports from the Tennessee site described mineral formations that exhibited properties inconsistent with established geological principles. The crystalline structures, according to his measurements, seemed to resonate at frequencies that corresponded to no known natural occurrence. What initially appeared to be a fascinating scientific anomaly would soon reveal itself as something far more disturbing than academic curiosity could accommodate. The research station occupied a narrow valley known locally as Serpent's Hollow, a designation that federal surveyors had dismissed as regional folklore until they began their own investigations. Cherokee oral histories, documented by ethnographer Dr. Sarah Chen in her 1961 study of southeastern tribal traditions, described the area as a place where the earth dreams restless dreams and the stones remember what they should forget. These accounts had been relegated to the realm of cultural mythology until the research team's instruments began detecting anomalies that suggested the indigenous warnings contained more empirical truth than anyone had anticipated. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong came from the team's seismographic equipment during their second week at the site. The instruments detected rhythmic vibrations emanating from deep underground, patterns so regular and consistent that they resembled artificially generated signals rather than natural geological processes. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the expedition's seismologist, noted in her field journal that these vibrations occurred in precise 47-minute intervals, maintaining this schedule with mechanical precision that defied explanation. More troubling was her observation that the patterns seemed to intensify whenever research personnel conducted excavations or core sampling in specific areas of the valley floor. The mineral samples collected during the first month defied conventional classification and analysis. The crystalline formations contained structural properties that conventional mineralogy couldn't adequately explain. When exposed to electromagnetic fields, these crystals produced luminescent responses that pulsed in synchronization with the underground vibrations. Laboratory analysis revealed organic compounds embedded within the mineral matrix, compounds that bore unsettling similarities to neural tissue despite their apparent geological origin. Dr. Whitfield's personal research notes, recovered months later during the investigation, documented his growing conviction that these formations represented something unprecedented in the scientific literature. According to declassified documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, the research team's photographer, James Morrison, captured images that would later be sealed under national security protocols. These photographs showed the crystalline formations arranged in vast underground chambers, their surfaces covered with intricate patterns that appeared to shift and change between exposures. Most disturbing were the images taken in the deepest accessible sections of the cave system, which revealed mineral structures that seemed to track the photographer's movement. Their faceted surfaces reflecting light in ways that created the distinct impression of observation and intelligence. By the third week, the psychological effects on the research team became increasingly apparent and concerning. Dr. Vasquez reported vivid dreams of walking through enormous underground cities populated by geometric entities that communicated through harmonic frequencies. Morrison complained of persistent sensations of being watched, even when alone in his quarters. Most troubling was the behavior of Dr. Whitfield himself, who began spending extended periods staring into the crystal formations, claiming he could perceive patterns of communication that existed just below the threshold of human understanding. The research station's final radio transmission, recorded at the university's Base Communications Center, lasted exactly 11 minutes and contained information that federal authorities would spend decades attempting to suppress and analyze. Whitfield's voice, described by the radio operator as distant and dreamy, as if speaking from underwater, reported that the team had established contact with what he termed the architects of deep time. He spoke of revelations concerning the true nature of geological processes, claiming that mountain formations weren't products of tectonic activity, but rather the physical manifestations of vast ancient intelligences that had been shaping the Earth's structure for millions of years. According to the transmission transcript, the crystals weren't minerals at all, but rather sensory and communication organs belonging to these primordial entities. The rhythmic vibrations detected by their equipment were attempts at communication, and the team had inadvertently awakened something that had been dormant for geological ages. Whitfield's final words before the transmission ended were, "They've been waiting so patiently for someone with the tools to listen." We understand now why the Cherokee maintained their distance. Some knowledge changes you in ways that can't be undone. The stones are singing, and we're learning their language. Federal search and rescue teams reached Serpent's Hollow 5 days later, following the research station's failure to maintain scheduled communications. They found the facility intact but completely abandoned, with all scientific equipment still functioning normally and personal belongings left undisturbed. The only signs of the team's presence were their research instruments, continuing to record data automatically, and Morrison's camera equipment, which contained no photographic evidence of the crystalline formations that had been the focus of their investigation. The most disturbing discovery was made in the main cave system, where the team had been conducting their primary research activities. The crystal formations that Whitfield had described in such detail were completely absent, leaving behind smooth-walled chambers that showed no evidence of ever containing the geological anomalies that had drawn the research team to the site. It was as if the Earth itself had absorbed the evidence of its own secrets, erasing any proof of what the scientists had discovered in those depths. However, the search teams did find one deeply troubling piece of evidence that couldn't be easily explained or dismissed. A series of perfectly cylindrical holes had been drilled into the bedrock floor of the main chamber, descending vertically into the mountain with mathematical precision that far exceeded the capabilities of any drilling equipment the research team had brought to the site. These shafts extended at least 3 miles into the earth, their walls polished to a mirror finish that reflected light in impossible configurations. Most unsettling was the discovery that these holes appeared to be breathing, drawing air down into the depths with a rhythm that precisely matched the seismic patterns recorded by the missing team's equipment. Dr. Michael Hartwell, the geologist who led the follow-up investigation, submitted a report that would remain classified for decades. His findings, only recently declassified through legislative pressure, described geological conditions in Serpent's Hollow that suggest the presence of vast hollow spaces within the mountain structure, arranged in patterns that resemble organic neural networks rather than natural cave formation. His team's ground-penetrating radar detected chambers of enormous size connected by tunnel systems that formed what appeared to be a three-dimensional mandala extending throughout the entire mountain range. The official investigation concluded that the research team had fallen victim to a catastrophic geological event that had obliterated all evidence of their presence. This explanation satisfied bureaucratic requirements, but failed to account for numerous inconsistencies, including the absence of debris that such an event would have produced, and the fact that the caverns showed no signs of structural collapse or disturbance. More troubling was the discovery that regional seismic monitoring stations had recorded no geological activity in the area during the time frame of the team's disappearance. In the months following the incident, residents of communities within a 100-mile radius of Serpent's Hollow began reporting unusual phenomena that suggested the entities dwelling beneath the mountains remained active. Farmers described livestock that would arrange themselves in perfect geometric patterns in their fields, all facing toward the distant valley. Children drew pictures of underground cities populated by crystalline beings that sang in frequencies only they could hear. Most unsettling were the reports from professional geologists and mineral prospectors who claimed to hear harmonic tones emanating from the earth itself when they ventured too close to the restricted area. The federal government quietly established a permanent monitoring station near Serpent's Hollow, officially designated as a geological research facility, but actually serving as an early warning system for continued activity from whatever dwells beneath the mountains. This facility operates under strict security protocols, and its personnel undergo regular psychological evaluations to detect any signs of the influence that claimed the original research team. Recent satellite imagery and seismic data have revealed ongoing developments in Serpent's Hollow that suggest the entities deep within the mountain remain active and aware. Thermal imaging shows temperature variations in the rock formations that pulse in the same 47-minute cycles recorded by the original expedition. More disturbing are the geometric patterns visible from aerial photography, indicating that something deep within the mountain continues to reshape the landscape according to principles that exist outside human comprehension. Local residents continue to report strange occurrences, particularly during the new moon when the mountains are darkest and the interference from human activity is minimal. These accounts describe a sound like vast machinery operating in the depths, audible for miles but impossible to locate or record. Hikers speak of finding perfectly circular clearings in the forest where no vegetation grows, the earth polished smooth as glass and warm to the touch, even in winter. Most tell of an overwhelming sensation of being observed whenever they venture too close to the valley, as if vast, patient intelligences are watching from deep within the mountain itself. The fate of Dr. Whitfield's research team remains officially unexplained, but evidence suggests they encountered something that the Earth itself was determined to keep secret. Whether they fell victim to geological phenomena beyond current scientific understanding or made contact with intelligences that exist in the spaces between our understanding of reality, their disappearance serves as a reminder that these ancient mountains hold secrets that perhaps should remain undisturbed. For those who study the unexplained phenomena of Appalachia, Serpent's Hollow represents one of the most compelling cases of contact with something genuinely otherworldly. The precision of the geological modifications, the systematic nature of the ongoing phenomena, and the complete absence of conventional explanations point to intelligence vast and ancient, operating according to principles that predate human civilization by millions of years. The mountains of Appalachia have always been places where the boundaries between the known and unknown grow thin, but in Serpent's Hollow, those boundaries may have been crossed entirely.